Angelica's life seemed peaceful, with memories of love and sacrifice surrounding her in the comfort of her home. But beneath the surface, a story of betrayal and greed by her sons was unfolding. Despite all she had done for them, Alessandro and Mauricio had plans driven by their selfish desires, ready to sacrifice their mother's well-being for financial gain. Angelica, isolated and medicated against her will, discovered the sinister plot by the very children she had raised with love. Yet, just when hope seemed lost, an unexpected ally in the form of a kind nurse appeared, bringing light to her darkest days. In the end, justice and love triumphed as her adopted daughter, Victoria, fought to save her mother, reclaiming the family bond that Angelica thought she had lost forever. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. In the dimly lit kitchen of her modest home in Monterey, Angelica stood with her graying hair messily pinned up in a loose bun. She gripped her coffee cup with shaky hands that had weathered decades of life's trials and triumphs. Her eyes, once filled with the fire of youth, now held a quiet plea as they rested on her two sons, Alessandro and Mauricio. "It's been so long since I've visited the market," she began, her voice tinged with a soft yearning. "I'd love to pick up some fresh vegetables. Could one of you come with me?" The silence that followed her words was heavy. The brothers exchanged brief, almost resigned glances. Alejandro reluctantly set his phone down, frustration already bubbling under his calm facade. "Mom, I get that you want to get out of the house," he started, struggling to keep his tone patient, "but today just isn't the right day. I've got this job interview coming up, one that could make a difference. I need to focus on preparing for it. Review my resume, practice answering questions, and make sure I pick out the right clothes. It's not just about showing up. I really can't afford distractions right now," he added, his words heavy with exasperation and guilt. Mauricio, sitting across from them, let out a deep sigh that echoed with annoyance. "Mom, I've got my responsibilities too," he chimed in. "Just because I work from home doesn't mean I'm lounging around all day. I've got deadlines, meetings, and people depending on me. I can't drop everything just to go to the market. Why can't you just go by yourself this time? Plenty of older women manage just fine on their own." Angelica's heart sank, and her voice trembled as she responded. "You don't understand," she whispered, her words almost drowned out by the weight of her sorrow. "Ever since my back started acting up, I've been terrified of falling or getting sick far from home. Before she left for Europe, Victoria always went with me. She enjoyed spending that time together. Now it feels like these walls are closing in on me, and I don't even have my sons to rely on." Her words hung in the air, a mixture of disappointment and sadness clouding her eyes as she gazed at her sons. Alejandro's frustration grew, and he couldn't hold it back any longer. "It's always about Victoria, isn't it? Victoria this, Victoria this, Victoria that," he mimicked in a sarcastic tone. "Mom, we have our own lives to live, our priorities. Victoria chose to go off to Europe to chase her dreams. She made it clear where her priorities lie." He paused, his breath coming in short bursts as his irritation escalated. "And let's not forget, Mom, Victoria isn't even your real daughter. She's adopted. We, Alejandro and Mauricio, are your real children, your flesh and blood. I'm sick of constantly being compared to her." Angelica flinched as if struck by his words, her heart aching at the cruelty of them. "I'm not comparing anyone," she stammered, choking back tears that threatened to spill over. "All I wanted was a little companionship, a little help. I spent my entire life caring for you, making sure you had everything you needed. And now, when I ask for the smallest favor, it feels like I'm asking for the world." Her voice trembled with raw emotion as she continued, her strength wavering. "Do you remember when you were children, how I would drop everything to care for you? Every fever, every scraped knee, every nightmare, I was there. And now, here I am, a 73-year-old woman, just asking for a bit of time, a bit of kindness. but instead I feel like a burden, like I'm no longer worth your attention." Her words hung in the room like a heavy fog, filled with sadness and a deep, aching sense of betrayal. The tears that had been welling up in her eyes began to slip down her weathered cheeks, but she stood tall, refusing to let herself crumble in front of them. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice everything for me. All I want is to feel like I'm still a part of your lives, like I still matter to you." With her voice trembling, Angelica continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Victoria may be halfway across the world in Europe, but that doesn't mean the love I have for her is any less just because she's adopted. It hurts to think that you can't see beyond that simple fact. She may not share my blood, but she shares my heart. Just as both of you do. I had hoped that as my sons you would understand that. All I wanted was a moment, a small, precious moment together, to feel connected to the family that means everything to me." Her gaze moved between Alejandro and Mauricio, searching desperately for a hint of warmth, a flicker of empathy that seemed to drift further away with each passing second. Angelica's voice softened as she spoke again, as though releasing a burden she had carried for far too long. "And it's not even that I'm asking for too much. I know I'm not the same as I used to be. Whether it's the medication for my blood pressure or my aching joints, I don't know, but these days I find myself sleeping most of the time." She paused, her mind replaying the endless days of solitude. "When I do wake up, it's late, and sometimes I just fall asleep again, on the sofa, in the armchair, anywhere really. And on those rare occasions when I am awake, it feels like I'm invisible to you. You barely acknowledge my presence, let alone spend any time with me." Her voice was heavy with sorrow, thick with disappointment, and a deep sense of abandonment. Mauricio, unable to hide his growing disdain, let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "Well, maybe you should take a higher dose of that medication so you can sleep more and spare us the drama," he muttered coldly, his tone laced with mockery. Alejandro, standing beside him, nodded in silent agreement, his face showing nothing but impatience. "Mom, we're doing the best we can," Alejandro said, his irritation now fully on display. "We have our own lives, our responsibilities. We can't just drop everything every time you ask. It's not fair for you to expect us to drop everything at your convenience." Angelica looked at them, her expression a mix of disbelief, hurt, and anger. "I don't ask for much," she said, gesturing around the room to the comfortable surroundings that they all enjoyed. "You both live well here. You're grown men, yet neither of you has even gotten married. All this time, I've lived on your father's pension after all his years as an army captain, and I never complained. But now, with Victoria so far away, I've never felt more alone." Her words echoed the loneliness that weighed on her soul, the aching void that neither of her sons seemed to recognize. "You can't see, you can't even begin to understand how hard this has been for me. I'm not just asking for help, I'm asking for love, for the smallest sign that I still mean something to you." Alejandro, his patience worn thin, cut her off sharply. "Enough, Mom. Stop guilt-tripping us with these endless complaints. We're not Victoria, and we're not going to baby you like she did. We're doing what we can, but we're not obligated to listen to this all the time. Especially about that adopted girl who doesn't even share our blood." His words were like daggers, dripping with resentment and frustration. Angelica instinctively stepped back, as though physically struck by his harshness. The words stung deep, leaving an ache in her chest that seemed to grow with every passing second. The once warm kitchen now felt suffocating, the air thick with tension and unspoken pain. Each person was trapped in an emotional storm. The conversation devolved into a battlefield of bitterness and long-buried wounds. The next morning, Angelica awoke feeling groggy and disoriented, a sensation that had become unsettlingly familiar. Slowly, she dragged herself out of bed, her joints aching as she shuffled toward the bathroom. As she neared Alejandro's room, the door stood slightly ajar, and she couldn't help but overhear her son's hushed conversation. A knot tightened in her stomach as she paused, listening intently. "The sedatives aren't working as well as we hoped," Mauricio was saying, his tone low but laced with frustration. "She's still awake too much, and every time she is, she's tormenting you with her complaints. We wanted her to sleep more, not just stay alive to keep getting that generous pension from the army." Angelica's breath caught in her throat, a wave of nausea washing over her as the cold cynicism of Mauricio's words hit her. How could this be? "Yeah, we can't afford to lose that pension," Alejandro agreed darkly. "But we need to find another way to keep her quiet. And whatever we do, we have to keep Victoria out of this. She's already calling too often from Europe, checking in on Mom. If she catches wind of anything, she'll stop sending money for Mom's care. We can't let that happen." The words were callous, cold, and calculated, and Angelica felt her knees weaken beneath her. She could barely comprehend what she was hearing, her mind swirling with disbelief. How had it come to this? Mauricio's voice, suddenly animated, snapped her back to the moment. "I have an idea," he said, a sly, conspiratorial tone creeping into his words. "It might seem a little crazy, but it could solve all our problems. Just imagine it, we'd have the apartment to ourselves, no more nagging, no more interruptions. We could invite our girlfriends over whenever we wanted, and best of all, we'd still be getting that pension." His excitement was unmistakable, and Angelica, standing just outside the door, felt her heart shatter. How had her sons turned into this? The people she had devoted her life to caring for now spoke of her, as though she were nothing more than a burden, an obstacle to their selfish desires. The cold, calculated conversation pierced her to the core, leaving her trembling with a profound sense of betrayal and heartbreak. Alejandro leaned forward, his interest piqued. "I'm all ears, Mauricio. What's the plan?" Angelica stood frozen just outside the door, her heart racing, each word from her sons cutting deeper into her already wounded soul. The coldness in their voices, the sheer betrayal, wrapped around her chest, squeezing the air out of her lungs. Mauricio, with a sinister gleam in his eyes, continued, his voice carrying a disturbing thrill. "I found a nursing home," he began, his tone hushed but brimming with excitement. "It's not exactly top tier, but that's beside the point. The key thing is, they're very accommodating to the family's wishes. We can arrange it so Mom has no outside contact whatsoever, not even by phone. That way she can't talk to Victoria or anyone else. No more interruptions, no more complaints." He smiled, clearly pleased with his devious solution. Alejandro, absorbing every word, nodded slowly. "That's genius, Mauricio. I can't believe we didn't think of this sooner. But there's still the issue of Victoria. She's going to want to talk to Mom eventually. We can't just cut her off without raising suspicion." Mauricio's smile widened. "I've already considered that," he said confidently. "We've been telling Victoria that Mom's been sleeping a lot because of the sedatives she has no idea we're giving her. We can spin it further and say that Mom's developed Alzheimer's and it's progressing rapidly. We tell Victoria that Mom doesn't even recognize her anymore. That she's losing her memory, her speech, everything. We claim it's the doctor's advice to keep her calm, with no stress and no confusion. We can even throw in that she's under constant care from a nurse." Mauricio leaned back, clearly satisfied with the evil plot he had laid out. That way, Victoria will feel obligated to send even more money, thinking it's for Mom's care. And she'll have no reason to doubt it, not when we're the ones taking care of her. Alejandro's face lit up with approval. "Mauricio, you're a genius. This plan solves everything. No more nagging, no more guilt trips, and we can keep squeezing that adopted girl for more money. She may think she's a part of this family, but she'll never really be a Ramirez." His voice dripped with disdain, as if they were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than the fate of their mother. Angelica stood there, her body trembling. as the full weight of their betrayal crashed over her. Her flesh and blood, plotting against her with such cruelty, treated her as if she were nothing more than a burden to be discarded. The heartache was unbearable. The realization that the love she had poured into them had twisted into something dark and selfish. She felt the tears she had been holding back fall silently down her cheeks, but she dared not make a sound, not wanting to alert them to her presence. Angelica stood frozen by the door, her heart pounding painfully against her chest as the cruel words of her sons echoed in her mind. Each sentence had been like a dagger, piercing her very soul. How could they do this to me? She thought, her inner voice trembling with shock and disbelief. Her sons, those she had cherished and nurtured, were drugging her, manipulating her life, all for the sake of money. The realization was like a nightmare she couldn't escape, a betrayal so deep it left her breathless. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as she quietly turned away from the door. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, burdened by the weight of despair and hopelessness that now engulfed her. "I need to reach Victoria," Angelica whispered to herself, her voice trembling as she moved slowly back toward her room. But as she sank into her bed, the cold, cruel reality hit her like a wave. She didn't have her daughter's number. Her sons had always been the ones to control the communication, never allowing her direct contact with Victoria. They had kept her isolated, and now she felt utterly trapped. A deep sense of helplessness washed over her as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at her was lined with years of sacrifice, etched with the memories of a life dedicated to others. Tears carved paths down her wrinkled cheeks, each drop a testament to the love she had given, the care she had offered, and now, the pain she could barely endure. "How could I have been so blind?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "I raised them, I loved them, and yet all I am to them now is a source of income." Her mind drifted back to memories of their childhood, their laughter, their innocent smiles, the way they used to cling to her with unconditional love. Where did I go wrong, she wondered, the question gnawing at her from the inside. When did the love of a child for their mother turn into something so cold, so filled with greed and disdain? The doubt began to creep into her heart, filling it with sorrow and a deep, aching lament. She closed her eyes as the tears continued to fall, her sadness spilling out in silent sobs. "I gave them everything," she whispered into the emptiness. "I gave up my dreams, my life, all for them. And now I'm nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle in their way." The thought was unbearable, the betrayal too painful to comprehend. Was my love so insufficient, she asked herself, her voice choked with emotion. Did it leave no trace of compassion in them, no sense of duty or care for their mother? The sorrow in her heart deepened, a quiet, relentless grief that seemed to have no end. Meanwhile, in the other room, Alejandro and Mauricio realized something was wrong. They exchanged alarmed glances as they noticed their mother's quiet sobs. "Great, now she's heard everything," Alejandro muttered under his breath, irritation and urgency evident in his voice. "We need to move fast. We can't risk her telling anyone. Let's hide all the phones, make sure she can't communicate with anyone outside. We'll have to speed up the plan." Mauricio nodded, his eyes narrowed with determination. "She won't get the chance to talk to Victoria. We'll make sure of that," he said, already calculating their next moves, oblivious to the depth of the pain they were causing their own mother. "Yes," Mauricio agreed, his tone cold and resolute. "And if she somehow manages to talk to anyone, we stick to the Alzheimer's story. That way, no one will take her seriously. They'll just think it's the disease talking." His determination was chilling, as if he had already accepted the idea without a second thought. "I'll contact the nursing home right now," he continued, pulling out his phone with a sense of purpose. "And you, Alejandro, you need to call Victoria. Tell her that Mom's condition has worsened, that she's lost her lucidity completely. That way, she'll stop trying to talk to her and just keep sending the money." Alejandro nodded, the plan now fully set in motion. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "As soon as we get the green light from the nursing home, we'll move her there. The sooner the better." There was no hesitation in his words, only a firm resolve to see their plan through, no matter what it meant for their mother. In her room, Angelica, weakened by the sedatives her sons had been secretly giving her, felt an overwhelming wave of drowsiness wash over her. She fought to stay awake, her mind reeling from the horror of what she had overheard, but the drugs were too strong. She finally succumbed to sleep, her body sinking into the bed. Her face, still marked by the tracks of her tears, bore an expression of deep helplessness and sorrow, a silent testament to her suffering. Meanwhile, Alejandro picked up the phone and dialed Victoria's number, his face carefully arranged into a mask of concern. As the line connected, he prepared himself to lie. "Victoria." He began, his voice filled with false sorrow. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. We took Mom to the doctor, and it's just as we feared. We didn't want to worry you before, knowing how busy you are with work, but Mom has advanced Alzheimer's." On the other end of the line, Victoria's voice trembled with desperation. "No, it can't be. I need to talk to her, Alejandro. It's been so long since you've let me speak with her. Please, I just need to hear her voice," she pleaded, her words choked with sobs, each one heavy with fear and anxiety. Alejandro, maintaining his deceitful calm, responded, "Victoria, it's not that we haven't let you talk to her. The truth is, she's no longer capable of having a conversation. She doesn't remember who you are anymore. We've tried, but she's even forgotten about me and Mauricio." He paused, feigning the struggle of holding back emotion, letting the silence deepen the impact of his lie. Victoria's heart broke on the other end of the call. No, that can't be true," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. The thought of her mother not remembering her, not even knowing who she was too much to bear. She clung to the phone, desperate for a way to reach out, to somehow connect with the mother she loved so deeply. But Alejandro, seeing the manipulation was working, pressed on. "I know it's hard, Victoria, but it's for the best that she stays calm and doesn't get overwhelmed. We've got everything under control here. You just focus on your work, and we'll keep you updated. Maybe it's best if you remember her the way she was." Before this illness took her away from us, his words were smooth, calculated, designed to keep Victoria at a distance while they carried out their cruel plan. Victoria, lost in her grief and feeling powerless from so far away, could only nod through her tears. "Just, please, keep me informed," she managed to say, her voice small and broken. She didn't want to believe it, but what choice did she have? Alejandro's words seemed so final, so absolute. "Of course, Victoria," Alejandro replied, his voice softening as he played the part of the concerned brother. "We'll take good care of her. You have my word." As he hung up the phone, a cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. Everything was falling into place. He turned to Mauricio, who was already on the phone with the nursing home, finalizing the arrangements. In her room, Angelica slept fitfully, her dreams a twisted maze of fear and confusion. The deep betrayal of her sons echoed in her mind even in sleep, a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. And in the cold, calculating minds of Alejandro and Mauricio, their mother was little more than a pawn, a means to an end, her life worth only as much as the money she could provide. Victoria, her tears streaming down her face, clung to the phone as if it were her last connection to her mother. "This can't be happening. I need to be there. I'll fly back to Mexico as soon as possible. I can't just sit here and do nothing," she said, her voice trembling with a desperate resolve that cut through her sobs. But Alejandro, growing frustrated with Victoria's refusal to simply accept his fabricated story, interrupted her sharply. "What world are you living in, Victoria? There's no cure for Alzheimer's, not in Europe, not anywhere. You need to face reality. Coming here won't change anything. It'll just cause more suffering for all of us. What you can do is help financially. We need to hire a nurse to care for her around the clock, and that's where you come in. The doctor said the best thing for Mom is peace and quiet, not more disruption. He delivered his words with calculated coldness, carefully maintaining the guise of concern while pushing her toward the outcome they wanted. Victoria, still struggling to process the heartbreaking news, tried to hold herself together. "I understand," she whispered, her voice filled with pain. It's so hard. I can't leave work right now, not in the middle of this project. But I'll send whatever money is needed. Please just make sure Mom is well cared for. Hire the best nurse. Do whatever you need to do." Her desperation was palpable, but so was her determination to support her mother in any way she could. Alejandro, sensing victory, responded with a measured tone, playing the role of the dutiful son. "Thank you, Victoria. We appreciate your willingness to help. We'll make sure Mom gets the best care possible, just as you would want. Don't worry, we've got everything under control." As he hung up the phone, a cold smile crept across his face. Mauricio, who had been listening intently, couldn't suppress a chuckle. "Bravo, Alejandro," he said with a twisted grin. "You almost deserve an Oscar for that performance. I was starting to believe it myself." His voice was dripping with satisfaction. "And my part's all set too. I finalized everything with the nursing home. They're on board with keeping her completely cut off from the outside world. A little extra cash made sure of that." The complicity between the brothers was evident, their shared success in this sinister plot binding them together in their lack of remorse. They had crossed a line, and neither of them showed any sign of looking back. Sometime later, Angelica stirred awake, her mind still clouded by the heavy sedation they had given her. She found herself in a car, the world outside the windows blurring past in streaks of light and shadow. She tried to speak, but her words were jumbled and weak, her thoughts a haze of confusion. She could hear Alejandro and Mauricio's voices, though they seemed distant, disconnected from the reality she was barely clinging to. She struggled to stay awake, her body fighting against the drugs coursing through her veins. But it was no use, the pull of unconsciousness was too strong. Despite her desperate attempts to remain alert, to understand what was happening to her, she slipped back into the darkness of sleep, her consciousness fading once more as the car sped toward the fate her sons had so cruelly chosen for her. When Angelica opened her eyes again, the room around her came into blurry focus, a small, cramped space with walls that had once been white but now bore the stains of time and neglect. She tried to rise, her body heavy and weak from the effects of the drugs still in her system. As she looked around, confusion clouded her thoughts. The room was sparsely furnished, just a worn-out bed and a rickety wardrobe, and the air carried a musty smell that made her feel even more unsettled. She was alone, and the silence was suffocating. She heard footsteps echoing in the hallway outside her door and called out for help, her voice trembling but laced with urgency. A caregiver appeared in the doorway, her face set in a mask of impatience. There was no warmth, no empathy in her eyes, only a cold detachment that made Angelica's heart sink. Summoning all the strength she had left, Angelica spoke up, her voice quivering with both fear and determination. "Please listen to me. I don't know what my children told you, but I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a lucid 73-year-old woman, not someone who needs to be locked away in a place like this. They gave me medication to keep me quiet. All they care about is my pension." Her voice cracked as she pleaded, but her resolve to be heard was clear. The caregiver barely glanced at her, responding in a flat, impersonal tone, her disinterest palpable. "I understand that you're confused about your condition, but you need to cooperate. This is your home now. Stay calm in your room and don't cause any trouble. We don't want to have to use intramuscular sedation." The caregiver's words were cold, devoid of any concern for the woman standing before her, and they sent a chill down Angelica's spine. Angelica's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling into despair. They must have told them I have Alzheimer's, she thought, her heart sinking further. No matter what I say, no one will believe me. They'll just think I'm confused, that I don't know what I'm talking about. A wave of hopelessness crashed over her, heavy and suffocating, as she realized the depth of her predicament. God, give me strength, she prayed silently, grasping at whatever hope remained within her. I don't know if I can endure this suffering, but I need your help. With a faint glimmer of hope, Angelica asked the caregiver if she could at least speak to her daughter, Victoria, who lived in Europe. It's been so long since we talked, she explained, her voice softening into a desperate plea. Please let me talk to her. But the caregiver's response was as sharp and dismissive as before. Keep your stories to yourself, she snapped, her tone dripping with indifference. You're not allowed to contact anyone outside. If your children want to see you, they'll come during visiting hours. Her words landed like a blow to Angelica's chest, knocking the breath out of her. The casual cruelty of the response left her frozen, unable to muster any more words as the weight of her situation pressed down on her. In that moment, Angelica realized just how deeply trapped she was. No one would believe her, and the people she had spent her life loving and caring for had abandoned her to this fate. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls a suffocating reminder of the isolation she now faced. But deep within her, a small flicker of faith remained, and she clung to it with all her might. God, please don't let this be the end, she prayed silently, hoping that somehow, some way, a miracle would come to save her. Angelica sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness wrap around her like a suffocating shroud. The small slit of a window barely allowed any light to filter into the dim room. She stared at it longingly, as if the outside world, where life continued to bustle, was a distant memory, a world she was no longer part of. Time seemed to stand still in this forgotten corner of existence, leaving her trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The cold reality of her situation gnawed at her soul, and the stark truth that she was entirely at the mercy of strangers, cut off from the one she loved, haunted her every thought. In the days and weeks that followed, Angelica struggled to adapt to the routine of the nursing home, where loneliness and neglect seemed to be her constant companions. The caregivers showed little compassion, and the days blurred together into a monotonous cycle of isolation. Still, there was a part of her that refused to give in completely, a small, stubborn ember of resistance that she clung to, hoping it would keep her from being consumed by despair. One day, determined to reclaim a tiny piece of her independence, Angelica decided to take a bath by herself. The bathroom was poorly designed, with no support bars or safety measures for someone her age. But she longed for a sense of control, no matter how small. As she carefully stepped into the tub, her foot slipped on the wet floor, and she fell with a sickening thud. A sharp, excruciating pain shot through her leg, causing her to cry out in agony. "Please help me," she screamed, her voice echoing against the cold, unforgiving tiles. "For God's sake, someone help me. I'm in so much pain." She tried to move, but the searing pain in her leg was unbearable, leaving her helpless and vulnerable on the floor. Her sobs of desperation filled the small bathroom, but it felt like an eternity before anyone came to her aid. Finally, 2 caregivers rushed in, their expressions quickly shifting from indifference to alarm as they saw Angelica lying on the floor. One of them, her face etched with irritation, muttered, "My God, how did she manage to try and bathe herself without telling anyone?" There was no empathy in her voice, only frustration with the broken protocol. Angelica, through her tears, tried to explain that she had simply wanted to do something on her own, but her words fell on deaf ears. The caregivers exchanged looks, more concerned with the inconvenience than with her pain. "Alzheimer's patients can be difficult," one of them said dismissively to the other. "They forget things, like how to take care of themselves." We'd better call an ambulance. She needs to go to the hospital." Without another word to Angelica, they left the room to make the call, leaving her alone on the cold bathroom floor, her cries of pain fading into the silence. At the hospital, after a series of tests and x-rays, a doctor approached her bedside, his face serious but kind. "Mrs. Ramirez, I'm afraid you have a very severe fracture in your femur," he explained gently. "We'll need to perform surgery to repair it. Unfortunately, this means you'll have to stay in the hospital for some time to recover. The postoperative period will be difficult, and you'll need to remain immobilized for a while." His words were calm and professional, but the gravity of the situation was clear. Angelica felt a wave of fear wash over her. Immobilized, isolated, and now at the mercy of yet another set of strangers, she could only wonder what the future held. Would her sons even care enough to visit her? Would she ever escape this nightmare? She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. "God, please give me strength," she prayed silently, clinging to the last remnants of hope. "I can't endure this alone." As Angelica listened to the doctor's words about her surgery and postoperative care, tears welled up in her eyes. Despite the fear of the unknown, of the impending surgery and the pain that would follow, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. "That's fine," she whispered, her voice trembling with both sadness and acceptance. "I want to get better. I couldn't go back to that place anyway." Her words carried a quiet resignation, but also the relief of knowing she would be far away from the nursing home, if only for a while. The days that followed were a whirlwind of pain and immobility. Each movement sent sharp jolts of agony through her fractured leg, and the confinement to her hospital bed felt like yet another form of imprisonment. But amid the darkness, Angelica found a small light in the form of a nurse named Gonzalo. He was gentle, patient, and above all, he treated her with a kindness she hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. His presence was a balm to her aching heart, and for the first time in weeks, she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. On a particularly difficult day, when the pain seemed unbearable and the weight of her situation pressed heavily on her spirit, Gonzalo entered the room to check on her. Summoning her courage, Angelica looked up at him, her voice fragile yet filled with hope. "Gonzalo," she asked, her heart pounding in her chest, "have my children asked about me? Has my daughter come to visit?" Gonzalo's face softened with a sad expression as he gently shook his head. "I'm sorry, Angelica," he said quietly. "No one has come to see you. The only information the hospital has received is that your children instructed us not to allow you any contact with the outside world. They told us you have Alzheimer's and that it would be best for your well-being if you didn't speak to anyone." His voice was filled with regret, and it was clear that he, too, was disappointed by the situation. Angelica felt the crushing weight of disappointment settle over her, but within that sorrow, a flicker of determination began to grow. She met Gonzalo's eyes, her own filled with a deep sadness but also a newfound resolve. "Gonzalo," she said softly, "you've been a nurse for a long time. You must have noticed that I don't have Alzheimer's, right?" Gonzalo looked at her with a mixture of concern and understanding. "Yes, Angelica," he replied, his voice gentle. "I've had my suspicions that something wasn't right. You don't exhibit the typical symptoms of Alzheimer's, but I have to follow the instructions left by your children. Still, I promise I'll listen to your story. I can't make any promises about what I can do. I have to be careful not to lose my job, but I'm here for you." Lying in the hospital bed, Angelica took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she prepared to tell Gonzalo the truth. Her voice wavered as she began, but there was a firm resolve in her words. "Gonzalo, what my children did to me, it's something I never imagined possible. They've been drugging me, keeping me sedated so they could control my life and get rid of me. All they care about is my pension. Nothing else matters to them." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat, her eyes welling up with tears once again. They told everyone I had Alzheimer's, but it's all a lie. They just wanted to put me away so they could take everything. I was just a burden to them, nothing more than an obstacle in their way. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the pain of betrayal weighing heavily on her heart. She looked at Gonzalo, pleading silently for him to believe her, to be the one person who would listen and help. Gonzalo listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to deep sympathy as Angelica's story unfolded. He could see the truth in her eyes, the raw pain of a mother betrayed by her own children. "Angelica," he said softly, "I believe you. I can see that you're telling the truth. I don't know what I can do, but I won't abandon you. Let me see what I can find out. We'll take this one step at a time." Angelica nodded, a small glimmer of hope flickering in her heart for the first time in weeks. She wasn't alone, not entirely. Someone was finally listening. Angelica's tears flowed freely as she recounted the pain of her separation from Victoria. "My daughter, Victoria, she's always been the light of my life, the one who truly loved me," she said, her voice trembling with sorrow. "But my children, they've cut off all contact between us. I don't even know anything about my own daughter anymore." The agony in her words was unmistakable, each sentence heavy with the unbearable weight of her isolation. "I just want her to know the truth," Angelica continued, her eyes closing momentarily as she tried to steady herself. "I can't imagine the lies they've been feeding her. She deserves to know what they did to me." The desperation in her voice was palpable, a cry for help that seemed to hang in the air between them. Gonzalo stood quietly beside her, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief as he processed the depth of her situation. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Angelica," he said, his voice filled with empathy and quiet outrage. "It's unthinkable that your own children would do this." Despite the helplessness he felt, Gonzalo was determined to do something, anything, to help her. "Please, Gonzalo," Angelica begged, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have to contact my daughter. She's my only hope. If I go back to that place, I don't think I'll survive it." Her plea was raw, filled with a mixture of desperation and the last threads of hope she could cling to. Gonzalo hesitated, the fear of jeopardizing his job weighing heavily on his mind. "I want to help you, Angelica. I really do," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But if I get caught, I could lose everything." He paused, thinking for a moment. "Do you have your daughter's phone number?" Angelica's face fell into sadness as she shook her head. "No, I don't," she replied, frustration evident in her voice. "My children always made the calls. They have her number saved in their phones. I'm completely cut off." Gonzalo furrowed his brow, considering the options. After a moment, he asked, "What is your daughter's full name?" "Victoria Ramirez," Angelica responded, her voice filled with pride and a glimmer of hope. "She carries my last name." Her eyes sparkled with love as she spoke of her daughter, holding on to the possibility that Gonzalo might be able to find her. "I'll try to find her," Gonzalo promised, his determination clear. He knew this could be risky, but something in Angelica's plea stirred a sense of duty within him. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. The next day, as the first rays of sunlight filtered into the room, Gonzalo entered with a mix of anxiety and cautious joy on his face. Angelica, still weak from the pain and surgery, looked up at him with anticipation. "How are you feeling today, Angelica? Are you in much pain?" he asked, checking the monitors beside her bed with a gentle hand. "I have news for you," Gonzalo said, his voice low and careful. Angelica's heart raced, and she responded with a trembling voice, "Please, Gonzalo, let it be what I'm hoping for. You'll be my angel, the last hope I have left." Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation, clinging to the possibility of something good after so much suffering. "Yes," Gonzalo whispered, "but please, speak softly." He glanced around the room, making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "If anyone finds out what I did, I could lose my job. The news is good, but it's not everything we might hope for." He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture from a social network. "Is this your daughter?" Angelica's eyes widened as she saw the photo, her heart leaping with joy. She nodded vigorously, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Yes, that's my daughter, Victoria," she exclaimed, a smile breaking through her sorrow for the first time in weeks. The sight of Victoria brought back a flood of memories and a renewed sense of hope. Gonzalo smiled back, sharing in her emotion. "I found a picture of her with you," he said gently. "I sent her a message explaining everything what your children did, about your fall, and that you're here in the hospital recovering. I told her you need her, Angelica. I left my number so she can call me if she wants to confirm everything." Angelica clutched his hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Gonzalo," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me. You've given me a lifeline, and I'll never forget it." For the first time in a long while, hope began to fill the void that had consumed her, and she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to the love of her daughter. Angelica held Gonzalo's hand tightly, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "You don't know how much this means to me, Gonzalo. You may have saved my life with this gesture," she said, her voice sincere and filled with emotion. Gonzalo nodded, feeling the weight of his actions settle heavily on his shoulders. "Now we wait for her response. I hope Victoria reaches out soon," he said, putting his phone away and casting another glance around the room to ensure their conversation remained unnoticed. They both knew time was of the essence, but now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Angelica had hope. Later that day, as Gonzalo drove home after his shift, his phone vibrated with a call from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, filled with anxiety and desperation, introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Victoria, Angelica's daughter. I received your message. Is this really true?" Her voice trembled, a mix of fear and disbelief. Gonzalo took a deep breath, understanding the gravity of the moment. "Yes, Victoria, it's true. Your mother is here, recovering from surgery after a serious fracture. She's under my care, but we don't know how much longer she'll be here before being sent back to the nursing home. She's been through so much. Your brothers have been medicating her, keeping her sedated. And they've lied about her having advanced Alzheimer's to justify locking her away. They've isolated her and are using her pension for their own gain. She's completely alone." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was followed by the sound of her crying, her emotions overflowing through the phone. "That explains the lies they told me that my mother had Alzheimer's and couldn't remember me anymore," she said between sobs. "I feel so guilty. I knew something wasn't right. I should have come back to Mexico to see what was happening, but I never imagined that Alejandro and Mauricio could be capable of such cruelty." Her voice trembled with both grief and anger. "They're monsters, and they're going to pay for everything they did." Gonzalo listened, his heart heavy with sympathy for her. "Victoria, please don't blame yourself. What your brothers did is beyond belief, something no one could have predicted. You couldn't have known," he said gently, trying to offer her some comfort. Victoria, still crying, managed to thank him. "Thank you for everything, for believing in her, for taking care of her when no one else would. I'm going to arrange everything here and take the first flight to Monterrey. I won't leave her alone again." Her voice, though pained, was filled with determination. After the call ended, Gonzalo felt a wave of relief wash over him, though it was tempered with concern. He knew the risks of what he had done, but he also knew that it was the right thing to do. Later that afternoon, as the light outside began to fade, Gonzalo entered Angelica's hospital room with a soft smile on his face, his eyes shining with a hint of mischief. "Angelica, I'm heading out for the day, but it seems someone is here to surprise you," he said gently, slowly pushing the door open. "Just remember, try not to move your leg too much, even if you're excited." As the door opened fully, Angelica's breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Victoria, tears streaming down her face, but a smile breaking through, despite the emotions swirling inside her. Angelica's own tears began to fall as she reached out toward her daughter, overwhelmed with joy and relief. Mom, Victoria whispered, stepping closer to the bed. "I'm here. I'm so sorry it took me so long, but I'm here now." Angelica's voice trembled as she replied, "Oh, my sweet Victoria, I never stopped thinking of you. I knew you would come." They embraced as best they could, Angelica careful not to move too much, but the connection between mother and daughter was undeniable, a bond that not even the cruelty of others could break. Gonzalo watched from the doorway, a warm sense of fulfillment filling his heart as he quietly left the room, leaving them to share the moment they both had longed for. Gonzalo's words were the herald of a miracle Angelica had hardly dared to hope for. As the door swung open fully, a familiar figure appeared, and a suitcase dropped to the floor as Victoria, her daughter, ran toward the bed. Her eyes glistened with tears, and her face was filled with a love that only a mother could recognize. Angelica's heart soared, a tidal wave of emotion sweeping over her. In that moment, the pain in her leg seemed to vanish, replaced by the overwhelming joy of seeing her daughter again. Victoria threw her arms around her mother, holding her tightly, as though afraid to let go, as though her embrace could undo all the hurt. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Victoria cried, her words broken by sobs. "I should never have left you with them. I shouldn't have trusted them to take care of you. You'll never have to go through this again, I swear on my life." Angelica's tears mingled with Victoria's as she returned the embrace, pouring all her love into that moment. "My sweet Victoria," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't need to apologize for anything. You've always been my pride and joy. You're the greatest success of my life as a mother." Her words were filled with the deep, unconditional love that only a mother could offer. But as she continued, her voice carried a note of regret. "If anyone should apologize, it's me for allowing Alejandro and Mauricio to treat you differently just because you're adopted. I should have been harder on them. Look where that leniency has brought me." Victoria, still crying but with a fierce look of determination in her eyes, dried her tears and gazed at her mother. "None of that matters now, Mom. I've always known your love. I never doubted it for a second. Alejandro and Mauricio are despicable, and I won't rest until they pay for everything they've done to you." Her voice was strong, fueled by the fire of justice and protection. "They will never know peace again," she promised firmly. "I won't let them. You'll be safe with me, even if I have to take you to Europe. I'll never leave you alone again." Victoria's words were more than just a promise. They were a solemn vow, a guarantee that Angelica would never have to face the cruelty of her other children again. In that moment, mother and daughter reconnected not just as family but as allies, bound together by love and a shared determination to overcome the pain and injustice that had befallen them. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the hospital room's curtains, casting a warm glow on Victoria's face as she awoke in the chair beside Angelica's bed. She had stayed by her mother's side all night, refusing to leave her for even a moment. As she stretched and looked over at her mother, Victoria spoke with a newfound resolve. "Mom, a lawyer will be coming soon to discuss legal actions against Alejandro and Mauricio. It's important that you tell them everything, with as many details as you can remember." Her voice was calm but firm, the determination to seek justice unmistakable. Angelica, though still fragile, nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," she replied, a flicker of strength returning to her voice. But a shadow of worry crossed her face. "What about your job, Victoria? Won't you get in trouble for coming back to Mexico?" Victoria smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry about that, Mom," she said, her voice full of warmth and commitment. "I spoke with my boss. He said I can work remotely for the bank. And besides, I've saved enough money to be comfortable for a long time. If I need to leave my job to take care of you, I'll be just fine." Her words were filled with love, a reminder that nothing was more important to her than being there for her mother. Before the lawyer arrived, Gonzalo entered the room with a heavy expression. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said softly, the sadness evident in his voice. "Someone informed the hospital director that I brought someone from outside into your room, Angelica. I've been fired." There's no going back. His eyes reflected his worry as he continued. "I have a young daughter to support, but I know I did the right thing, even if it cost me my job." Victoria stood up and immediately embraced Gonzalo. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and sorrow. "You've been an angel in my mother's life, and we will never forget what you've done for us." She offered him financial assistance, but Gonzalo gently refused, insisting that he had helped out of the goodness of his heart and that accepting money wouldn't feel right. Angelica, deeply moved, also hugged Gonzalo, tears flowing freely down her face. "You're my hero, Gonzalo," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I'll never forget your kindness. I pray that God repays you for all the good you've done. Please don't lose touch. If you ever need anything, call us. We'll always be here for you." Gonzalo, visibly touched by their gratitude, smiled and thanked both women. "I'm just glad I could help," he said sincerely. "And if you need me to testify against your sons, just let me know. I'll be there." With that, he left the room, his heart lighter despite the challenges ahead, knowing that he had made a real difference in their lives. As the door closed behind him, Angelica and Victoria looked at each other, their bond stronger than ever. Though the road ahead would be difficult, they knew they would face it together, and that was enough to give them hope. The farewell between Angelica, Victoria, and Gonzalo was filled with deep emotion, a blend of gratitude and sadness that hung in the air. The bond forged between them was strong, born of compassion and a shared pursuit of justice. When the lawyer, Dr. Juarez, entered the room, his serious expression reflected the gravity of the situation. He was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, but as he listened to Angelica recount the harrowing ordeal she had endured at the hands of her sons, Alejandro and Mauricio, his face betrayed his shock and indignation. Angelica described everything in detail: how they had drugged her, kept her sedated, and isolated her in the nursing home. She spoke of the lies they had spun about her having Alzheimer's, the fear and helplessness she had felt, and the abuse she had suffered. Victoria sat beside her mother, her expression one of steely determination. When Angelica finished her story, Victoria turned to the lawyer and asked directly, "What can we do to ensure they are imprisoned?" Her voice was firm, resolute. She wasn't asking for leniency, she wanted justice. Dr. Juarez thought for a moment, carefully weighing his words. "From everything you've told me, Alejandro and Mauricio have committed multiple serious offenses, including elder abuse, fraud, the unauthorized administration of medication, illegal deprivation of liberty, and financial exploitation. These are grave charges that could result in significant prison time." He paused, then added, "However, in order to take immediate legal action, we'll need strong evidence to support these claims. Ideally, a confession would be the best course of action." He looked at both Angelica and Victoria, gauging their reactions. Without hesitation, Victoria declared, "I'll confront them. I can go to their apartment, search for evidence, and maybe even get them to confess. Whatever it takes." Her voice was unwavering, though she was fully aware of the risks involved. The lawyer leaned forward, his tone serious. "Victoria, that could be very dangerous. These are individuals who have shown they're willing to harm their own mother. Don't put yourself in harm's way." His words were measured but firm, reflecting his years of legal experience. Victoria nodded, acknowledging the warning. I understand the risks, but I can't stand by and let them walk away from this. My mother has suffered too much. They must face justice." The next morning, with a mixture of nerves and determination, Victoria stood outside the apartment where Alejandro and Mauricio lived. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When Alejandro opened the door, the surprise on his face was unmistakable. His expression quickly shifted to one of unease as he tried to maintain his composure, unaware that Victoria knew everything. "Ah, hello, Victoria," he stammered. "What a surprise. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? Mom's away at a spa with the nurse this week. Getting massage is supposed to be good for Alzheimer's, you know." Victoria forced a smile, pretending to be disappointed. "Oh, that's a shame. I came all this way just to see her. But can I come in? I'm exhausted after the long trip, and I'd love a glass of water." Her voice was casual, but beneath the surface, her mind was racing, executing the plan she had carefully devised. Alejandro, still off balance from the unexpected visit, gestured for her to enter. "Sure, come on in. Mauricio's in the shower, but make yourself at home. I'll grab you some water." He walked off, leaving Victoria alone in the living room. As soon as Alejandro was out of sight, Victoria sprang into action. She discreetly set up a live stream on her social media account and placed her phone in a strategic spot to record everything. Her heart raced, but she remained calm, knowing this was the moment she had been waiting for. When Alejandro returned with the water, followed by a freshly showered Mauricio, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Both brothers looked uneasy, sensing something was off. It was time. "Enough of the act," Victoria said, her voice simmering with anger. "I'm here because I just came from the hospital. I know everything you did to Mom, drugging her without permission, isolating her, lying about her condition, and sending her to that awful nursing home. What kind of monsters are you?" Mauricio tried to deflect, feigning innocence. "What are you talking about, Victoria? You must be confused. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" But before he could continue, Alejandro snapped. In a fit of anger, he blurted out the truth. "Yes, we did it. The old lady was so unbearable that not even the sedatives worked on her anymore." Victoria's face remained calm as she smiled coldly. "I hope you enjoy prison and your newfound internet fame," she said icily. "This entire conversation has been streamed live, and the police will be receiving the recording as well." She grabbed her cell phone and suitcase, turning on her heel and swiftly leaving the apartment. Behind her, Alejandro and Mauricio stood frozen in shock, their faces pale with fear as they realized what had just happened. The farewell between Angelica, Victoria, and Gonzalo was emotional, and the bond they had forged through compassion and justice remained strong. After submitting the incriminating video to the police, Victoria assisted in gathering testimonies from both Angelica and Gonzalo. Justice was swift, and Alejandro and Mauricio were arrested and sentenced to several years in prison. In his ruling, the judge emphasized the severity of their crimes, noting how their greed had not only violated Angelica's rights, but had endangered her very life. The decision was irrevocable, closing a dark chapter in the family's history. Time passed, and Angelica fully recovered, now living under Victoria's loving care. One quiet afternoon, while they enjoyed each other's company, Victoria shared some unexpected news. "Mom, you won't believe this," she said, her eyes lighting up. "The live stream I made confronting Alejandro and Mauricio went viral. It has millions of views. People are calling me the lioness adoptive daughter for standing up for you. I even got an offer to write a book about our story, with a decent advance payment." Angelica beamed with pride as she listened to her daughter. "I'm so happy, my love. You truly saved my life. You are my heroine," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, her eyes reflecting the deep love and gratitude she felt for Victoria. Victoria smiled warmly at her mother, but then grew more serious. "Mom, Gonzalo was also a big part of saving us," she said, watching as Angelica's face lit up at the mention of his name. I found out that he's living in a rented apartment with his young daughter. I got in touch with someone at an excellent hospital who's willing to offer him a good job, but I wanted to do something more, something special. Angelica listened intently as Victoria continued, her eyes shining with determination and gratitude. I've decided to buy Gonzalo and his daughter a new apartment. It's the least we can do to repay his kindness and bravery. He was our guardian angel during that dark time, and I want to show him just how much we appreciate everything he did. Angelica's eyes welled up with tears of joy. He truly deserves it, Victoria. Your heart is so good, my dear. What you're doing is incredible. Gonzalo will never forget your kindness, just as we will never forget his. In the days that followed, Victoria meticulously planned the surprise for Gonzalo. She searched for an apartment that would be perfect for him and his daughter, a place that felt warm and welcoming, a true home. Every detail was carefully considered, ensuring that the apartment would reflect the deep gratitude they felt for his role in their lives. Finally, the day of the big reveal arrived. Victoria invited Gonzalo to dinner, creating a pretext that hid the true purpose of the evening. When he arrived, still unaware of what was about to happen, Victoria and Angelica led him to the address of the new apartment. As they entered, Gonzalo looked around, clearly confused by the beautiful space with stunning views of the city. "What are we doing here?" he asked, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of it all. With a radiant smile, Victoria handed him a key. "Gonzalo, this is more than just a dinner. Today we want to show you how much your help meant to us. This is your new home, a place for you and your daughter. No more renting. This is yours." Gonzalo stared at the key in disbelief, his eyes filling with tears. "Victoria, this is too much. I just did what I thought was right. I never expected anything in return." His voice broke as he tried to process the overwhelming generosity. Victoria's eyes shone with emotion as she replied, "You saved my mother's life, Gonzalo. This is the least we can do for you. You deserve this and so much more." Overcome with gratitude, Gonzalo hugged both Victoria and Angelica. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This will completely change our lives. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Together they explored the apartment, each room a new revelation of beauty and comfort. Gonzalo marveled at every detail, and his daughter's excitement filled the space as she ran from room to room, delighted with her new home. That evening, they celebrated far more than just the gift of an apartment. It was a celebration of human kindness, gratitude, and the triumph of justice. For Gonzalo, Victoria, and Angelica, it was the beginning of a new chapter, where the shadows of the past were replaced by the bright promise of a better future. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of resilience, kindness, and justice. As you reflect on Angelica and Victoria's story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What have you learned from this powerful tale of love, courage, and standing up for what is right? Share one thing you've learned that you'll bring into practice in your own life by commenting below. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you inspiring stories like this one. We truly appreciate your presence and look forward to sharing more unforgettable stories with you soon. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.